What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out on YouTube every single week. The Champions League knockout stage finally kicked off, except we're in one of those very rare situations where there is a league game that is going to take precedence over the Champions League. Almost never happens. But that is the situation we find ourselves in. So first, we're going to address what happened at the Emirates on Wednesday. Manchester City 3, Arsenal 1. And I want to start this conversation by just pointing out the ways in which this game was so symbolic of what it's like going against Manchester City in a title race. It was a really, really fitting game for the way this season is playing out. I've been consistent from the beginning. City can be beaten to a title. You don't have to get 99 points, 98 points, what Liverpool were doing to beat them. Go look at the actual point totals they have had since they had those two ridiculous seasons. They are vulnerable to a very small extent. And that's the point. It can be done. It can only be done if you don't make mistakes. If you are basically flawless. And so looking at this game, first half, you saw exactly why City are vulnerable. Pep Guardiola makes what might be the most bizarre decision so far in any of these big games in this narrative that outside of last season's Champions League, because I remember going to bat for Guardiola after the semifinal loss to Real Madrid, that he didn't do anything strange in those games. But you look at the Lyon loss, you can go down the list of these examples where Pep in these huge moments, usually in the Champions League, but in this case in a Premier League game, does something bizarre for no real reason other than to just try and do something different. And there's a real argument he just outthinks himself sometimes. And I've always been of the belief there's a reason your team is better than everybody else's, and there's a reason you're better than every other manager. You got to trust what you do best. Make people adapt to you. As Manchester City, you should never be adapting to anybody. And so they come out in this game with this hybrid back three, back four, with Bernardo Silva playing as some kind of left back and Nathan Ake kind of covering half the field. And it was a disaster. Bernardo Silva got a yellow in the first half. He probably should have gotten one before he actually got his. If those tackles were spread out across the game, he probably gets sent off for 2 yellows. It didn't work at all. It's not like the City team is invincible. And so what do you have happen by the end of the first half? I'm gonna save the City goal for a little bit later. You get the penalty, and yes, that's a penalty. Now, City has a valid complaint that ultimately they made irrelevant because they took care of business in the second half. If I'm Pep, my frustration is, and I will acknowledge this, I can't stand things that goalkeepers get away with inside the box. The reality is, though, they get away with so much that there's a standard that has been set because of the inconsistencies from official to official and inconsistencies in terms of approach across the Premier League that you can find example after example that were worse than what Ederson did, that didn't get any kind of repercussions. That doesn't mean this one should slide, but what's that kind of cliche, right? All you're asking for from referees is consistency. It's not Anthony Taylor's fault this hasn't been called in other places, most of which he had nothing to do with, because that's a penalty. He destroyed Nketiah. And he took Nketiah out of the play moving forward. But you've got to set some kind of standard so people know what they can and can't do. It is a penalty. It's just one that's not called consistently. That's not Arsenal's problem. But that is a Premier League officiating problem on the list of clear problems the Premier League is having with officiating right now. But regardless, Arsenal get the penalty, Saka converts it, and it's 1-1 at halftime. And you very much feel like Arsenal is going to at least get a draw out of this, that they were clearly the better team. Haaland had done next to nothing. The Silva thing was a disaster. They outside of one bad moment, they were fantastic in that first half. That was their game to go on and win. Now, obviously, they had to actually do that, and they failed to. But that was 100% the vibe I had at halftime. And then you come out in the second half, right? You've already made one mistake, and I still will defend Arteta with the decision to start Tomiyasu. It made a lot of sense to me. It obviously backfired. Sometimes good ideas don't work out the way you expect. So you've got that one mistake, and then you see a couple others in the second half, and all of a sudden it's 2-1, and Haaland's putting it away for 3-1. I saw Mikel Arteta also pointing out the missed chances, specifically Nketiah, who got himself into good positions and just couldn't finish. It's not like Arsenal looked completely overwhelmed or that they didn't belong on the field or that the moment was way too much for them from a playing standpoint. They didn't get played off the field. They beat themselves, which you could argue is a different kind of version of being overwhelmed or not prepared because this team hasn't been here before. But that's the story here. They have shown throughout these last 3 meetings with City in particular, they're right there. They can go toe-to-toe with City. They don't get outplayed. The question is mistakes that are going to allow City to take advantage because, by and large, they don't make them. And they set the bar so high that you have to be able to match it. And if you're not able to match it, you are not going to beat them over 38 games. That's what you saw in this one. Arsenal showed you in the first half. It can be done. City can be made to look kind of disorganized, unsure of themselves. You can get at them. You can outplay them. But you have to do it time and time and time and time again, because they're not going to go away. And so now you're back into this situation where, yes, technically City are on top of the league table because of goal difference. Yes, Arsenal still have the game in hand. And so this has gone from, and this was always the question with this game, were we going to leave with this being still Arsenal's league and Arsenal's title to lose because you're 6 points clear, you haven't lost at home all season, and you have a game in hand? Or was this going to be, we're kind of back to square one with the title race, and if it's square one, you're going to pick Manchester City? Or were we going to be kind of in the middle where Arsenal find a way to sort of hold on to a draw, keep their advantage, but no, they still have to go to the Etihad, and you close the gap a little bit, but you still have a lead. That was the question here. Which of those was going to happen? How are we going to feel about this title race after this game? And at halftime, I thought we were going to be talking about Arsenal reestablishing firm control by winning this game. I really did. Maybe it's just my blind faith in what I've seen from this team, because I just refuse to stop believing in them, even during this run. But the problem you're now facing is you gave yourself that cushion so that you didn't have to be perfect the second half of the season. Manchester City made way more mistakes in the first half than Arsenal did. They were better than they even needed to beat Manchester City. The problem is you only did it for the first half of the season. But you gave yourself a couple slip-ups, a couple points that could have been dropped off of a missed VAR call against Brentford. You gave yourself a sort of strange situation you walk into at Goodison with Sean Dyche taking over for the first game in kind of this new manager bout, wave of energy that you've got to come up against. That margin was built into the second half of the season. You even gave yourself enough of a margin, thanks to Manchester City losing to Spurs, to not take all 3 points at home against Manchester City. The problem is you've now used all of those up, and it's February 15th. There are only so many mistakes you get when you're playing Manchester City and when you're chasing Manchester City and when you're battling Manchester City. Arsenal had too many of them in this game, and they've had too many of them early in the second half of the season. And so we're at a point now where this game, or this league, is now in both of their controls simultaneously. Arsenal can still end up with have more maximum points available. If they win their game in hand and they don't lose at the Etihad, they're in a pretty good position. If Manchester City win at the Etihad, they are also then, right, you take those final 3 points away, and if they win out, they're going to win the league. Because you take those 3 potential points Arsenal could have with that game in hand, and you eliminate them by winning the second head-to-head. That was always going to be a big part of this equation, is how does that 6-point swing, these 2 head-to-head games, go? And even with these recent stumbles by Arsenal, I held to the belief that they were going to do enough at home to at least still have some kind of cushion to play with. Whether it was going to be enough to hold off Manchester City for, 20 more games or whatever it is. I guess it's a little bit less than that now. 15, 20 games. That I wasn't sure about, depending on how this one went. But now it's gone. Unless you can get these 3 points back at the Etihad. And the other part of this is, if you're Mikel Arteta, you still got to just keep drawing from the fact that you're beating yourself. That there are no issues that need to be solved. You just made too many mistakes. And I would rather have that issue than feeling like you just don't have what you need to win this league. I still think Arsenal have shown time and time again, from a player to player, from a talent perspective, from a performance perspective, they have enough. The question is, can they get that version and not the version that makes 2 or 3 big mistakes week in and week out, and in the games where they really need it the most? Because the thing I've been harping on, the thing that crushed Arsenal last season, was that everything got compounded. It was never a loss. It was never one disappointing draw. It was, 3-game winless streaks, back-to-back losses. Go look at the points they dropped last season. They were all bunched together. And that's what they've done such a good job of this season. I believe they had a loss and draw combination, one of which was the Europa League game that just didn't matter that much at the end of the day. I'm not worried about that. But right after that, Manchester United loss. Bounced right back. And now it's been, kind of this strange, you got the FA Cup loss in there, but lost to Manchester City, lost to Everton, draw to Brentford, lost to Manchester City. 8 points dropped in 3 Premier League games. This is what Arsenal could not afford. And so now you got to go do it all over again. That's where we are. I'm not willing to concede this title race by any stretch of the imagination. City have had too many bad performances, have struggled too much at times for me to be convinced they're going to go, reel off 10, 15 straight wins. They obviously can. But don't forget, this is a team that just lost to Spurs not too long ago. And this is a team that played Bernardo Silva at left back in this game. And then had to undo all of that to actually get this win. Obviously, the odds are now in Manchester City's favor. They've been there before. They're the better team on paper. They've got the more experienced manager, all of that. But there's also an interesting aspect to this, which is now the pressure's on Manchester City again. Because now all of a sudden Arsenal are the underdogs. And they did such a good job dealing with the pressure of being the front runners and the people that were expected to go on and win this thing until it all came crashing down here. Maybe it kind of all turns around. And now that everybody expects City to win the league, it kind of goes back into Arsenal's favor. My rule generally with title races, I talk about this in the Bundesliga a lot, where I start to lose optimism that a team can hang with the favorite, the Bayern, the Manchester City, is when they are actually behind them in the table. Which seems very simplistic. And obviously, just because Bayern were down, 7th, 8th, somewhere in the Bundesliga table earlier this season, it's not that I actually thought somebody else was going to win the league. But I can make a more compelling argument when you do have, points to play with, when a head-to-head game isn't going to really damage your hopes. It's part of the problem that you're going to have in the Bundesliga right now is, okay, Union Berlin's right there. Union Berlin already got their home game against Bayern. Now you're asking Union Berlin to go at least get a point on the road against Bayern. It's a different conversation. If they were up 4 points, you can lose that game and still be leading. It's the difference between having something to hold on to and having to go chase something that seems impossible because you're going up against this giant, right? The first step is you have to actually believe you can do it. And I think so much of that comes with actually seeing a tangible, and maybe I'm overemphasizing this, putting too much stock into it, but I really think this is the thing. Being able to see your name ahead of theirs on the table. And Arsenal still have the opportunity for that because of this game in hand. They are still in control, just like City is in control. Because there's this game in hand, this game between them that either of them could win, they're both in control of their own destiny. So I do feel like this would have been much more deflating had it allowed City to not only go top of the table, because they're not top of the table on points per game, but to have actually built a lead again, where Mikel Arteta can't say, look, this is still completely within our control. If we win that game in hand, we have a 3-point edge. He still has that opportunity. Does that mean I think Arsenal are going to win? No. Am I more optimistic than most people? Probably. I am all in on this team. I expected there to be some stumbles in the second half of the season. I also expected those stumbles to be spread out enough because of how consistent they were in the first half, that it was never going to get to a point where they were the ones under pressure. That it was always going to be Manchester City can't afford to drop more points. Manchester City can't afford to drop more points, because even if Arsenal drop a couple here, drop a couple there, they're still 5 points ahead, 4 points ahead, whatever it might be. I didn't see one of these collapses, if you want to call it that, coming. So now you got to pick yourself back up and you got to go again. It's still there for the taking. I think we simultaneously don't give City enough credit for how difficult it is to just stay with them, and for the things they can do that just nobody else in the world can. I said this after what they did to Manchester United early in the season. I don't think that was on United. That was just City being brilliant. Now, they were not that in this game. And Arsenal certainly have individual moments and individual mistakes to point to. But City were really good in that second half. Jack Grealish is scoring important goals. Haaland is just a freak. And also, even the Tomiyasu mistake. Look at what Kevin De Bruyne had to do to actually execute, to turn that into a goal. Now, it's Kevin De Bruyne, so you're not surprised at all. You go, of course he's going to put that on the back of the net. It's not that easy, but he is that good. And so we just sort of take that part of it for granted. Well, also, not really. We take it for granted without sort of really recognizing what that means. And how incredible it is that, oh yeah, that chance fell to De Bruyne. It's in the back of the net. Those two things kind of go together, which makes the City conversation really interesting to me, and why I get frustrated sometimes, because I think we make it, like many things, we make it black and white and it's gray. Yes, they're incredibly difficult to hang with. Look at Arsenal, were on pace to tie City's record for the most points in a Premier League season at the halfway mark. City have now, in a season where they have been bad, matched Arsenal's point total, a month later. Maybe a little bit more than that. This game was exactly what this title race is going to be, right? Arsenal jump out, look really good. Now, they didn't go ahead in this game, but by the time it was halftime, they were level and on the front foot, more confident, looked like the team that were going to go on and win. But there's that second half to play. There's still plenty of time. I do think this is where it changes. It went from this is Arsenal's to lose to this is up for grabs. Logic says that means Manchester City. I laid out that maybe it as a reason as to why maybe it ends up working in Arsenal's favor. We're not at advantage Manchester City yet. We're back to square one. But it goes back to my general rule, and I think most people's general rule, if it's back to square one, you're going to go pick the team that has all of the players and Pep Guardiola and does this time and time again. Doesn't Arsenal still can do this? It can be done. You saw in this game the vulnerabilities Manchester City have. But you got to be almost perfect to do it. Arsenal were better than they need to be in the first half. But they used up all of their kind of get out of jail free cards with this stretch they're on. So now they got to go do it again the rest of the season if they want to win this Premier League title. That is all on that game. I'm going to take a break. When I come back, Champions League, 4 games. It is back. Round of 16 started. My thoughts on all of that action, from Bayern Munich PSG to Benfica getting a nice cushion ahead of their second leg against Club Brugge. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. It is Champions League time. Again, usually, especially with this show, it's designed to talk Champions League, but because of Manchester City, Arsenal did things in a different order today. Going back to Tuesday, your highest profile game of this first set in the round of 16. Bayern Munich go into Paris, get a 1-0 win, thanks to none other than former PSG player, Paris native, and Champions League final hero Kingsley Coman, who continues to haunt his former club. Kylian Mbappe comes off the bench in this game, and that's really where this needs to start, because what you saw in the first half is the flaws of both of these teams. PSG, and even with Mbappe, this is still an issue, but it got highlighted without him on the field. There are times where that front three gets so disconnected and just kind of leaves everybody else out on an island to fend for themselves that they cannot get control of the ball. And that's what the first half was. Mbappe makes this even more difficult because not only can you not get control of the ball, but when you are facing a press, the best way to beat it is to go over the top. Neymar and Messi are not doing that. That's where Mbappe comes in. But you didn't have him in the first half. I have seen this happen in person from a team coached by Jesse Marsch when I went to a Leipzig PSG Champions League game. It looks at times, if they sort of can't get into a rhythm offensively and if they can't stay connected and move the ball from back to front, like they're trying to play a counterattacking system without having the personnel to play a counterattacking system. And it especially looked like, again, without Mbappe in this game. Or it looks like they're trying to play a counterattacking system when they really aren't, but Mbappe finds a way to bail them out and kind of create those opportunities on the break. And then on the Bayern side of this, they pinned PSG in for almost the entire 45 minutes and did nothing with the ball. Which is what you see when Bayern are dropping points in the Bundesliga, when they've had these stretches where they just can't seem to get wins. It's not a possession thing. It's not a wasted opportunities thing for the most part. Now, maybe they have a good look or two that don't go in for whatever reason. But it's that they just keep moving the ball around and don't actually pose any kind of real danger. And that was what you saw in the first half of this game. And then the second half happened and things got much more interesting. Bayern actually started creating chances, and yeah, Donnarumma needs to do better on that goal. There are plenty of times where he's just interesting to try and evaluate, because obviously you saw what he could do. But there are also, it seems like, a lot of times where you just want your goalkeeper to do better. And this was Coman's goal was certainly one of them. But Bayern did start creating real chances. And then Mbappe comes on. Definitely rusty. You could see from some of his first touches. But also he was Mbappe. You know, he gets the ball in the back of the net. You start getting offside flags and goals disallowed. PSG came about as close as you could to equalizing without actually equalizing. And so now they're going back to Bayern down a goal. Not the end of the world. But it's another reminder. It doesn't matter how talented your front three is, or your front two, or whatever, if you're not willing to do the little things. There is a reason PSG have failed time and time again in the Champions League. You cannot win this competition by purely being better than everybody else. These teams are too good. So I'm going to save some of that conversation if they actually get eliminated the round of 16. The other thing I want to mention in terms of the second leg, Nuno Mendes needs to get more involved. because Bayern had all kinds of issues on the right side of that defense when Mbappe came on and you got Nuno Mendes overlapping. In terms of an outlet, when you're trying to play out of the back, your left wing back cannot be that outlet. But when you get him higher up the field and he turns into a winger, now all of a sudden you have two outlets. And they're two of the fastest players in the world. Bayern just could not deal with him. If you're PSG, that's what you have to be looking to do. But that also involves having the ball and not allowing that press to discombobulate you the way it did. But that's also the way they're built. They have a front three that is just detached and generally disinterested when they don't have the ball. There's a price to pay for that no matter how good those players are. So we will see if PSG can turn this thing around in leg 2, but they go back to Germany trailing 1-0. Second game from Wednesday, Borussia Dortmund 1, Chelsea 0. I don't know how many more times I have to say this about Chelsea. It doesn't matter how many more players you bring in. There is a fundamental issue with this squad that bringing in more, center attacking midfielders and more wingers, some of whom have a track record of struggling with the exact same things this team struggles with, it's not solving the problem. This team is just simply bad at finishing. In no small part because there is no number 9 on the field. There is no player whose primary gift, job, skill, however you want to frame it, is finishing. Kai Havertz, Raheem Sterling, I talked about this when Sterling joined. Sterling doesn't solve the problem because Sterling is also generally a poor finisher. Now, we're going to have to see with Mikhail Mudryk. There's some hope there. He's a really good player. But the person who stole the show in this game for the amount of waste opportunities was João Felix, who is also not an out-and-out goal scorer. He is not a number 9. Look at where he thrived for Portugal in the World Cup. He is not built to be the guy in the end of all of these chances. He's hitting the crossbar, getting in really good positions. They should have scored 3 goals in this game. They scored none of them because, yes, they got a little bit unlucky, right? They hit the woodwork a few times, forced some good saves, but it's the same story because they haven't solved the problem. And then Karim Adeyemi takes a corner kick. Takes the ball from a corner kick, right? It gets headed out to him. He just goes down the field. Absolutely humiliates Enzo Fernandez. Then he gets by Arrizabalaga and just slides it into the net. Dortmund had about 2 good chances early in the game. They were kind of on top for first 20, 30 minutes or so. Then it was just all Chelsea, except for this one moment from Adeyemi. It was sensational. Every time you watch that guy, and I was texting with my friend who's a Dortmund fan when Dortmund bought him. It's not like I was watching a ton of Red Bull Salzburg, but whenever I did watch him in the Champions League, you could just tell that dude is different. And he showed you why in that one moment. And so Dortmund continued. Was not a great performance. They should have lost by multiple goals. But you got your one moment in transition, and he cooked the most expensive player in Premier League history, finished the chance nicely, and now you've got a lead to hold on to against a team that struggles mightily to actually put the ball in the back of the net. And now you're going to start feeling the pressure, and now you get to play on the counter because Chelsea have to go for this in the second leg. Dortmund didn't deserve it. But that's the whole point about this with Chelsea. I keep saying this over and over and over. There are two different ways to evaluate it when teams don't, when the sort of the XG and the actual goals don't line up. Either you're incredibly unlucky, or it's an indication of a systemic issue where your players just are not finishing the chances they should. Sometimes, right, just weird things happen. But it's the same conversation with Brighton. From Graham Potter's, specifically from earlier in Graham Potter's tenure. Brighton were outstanding. They created all kinds of chances. Couldn't finish them. The difference for Brighton now is that they are actually finishing chances at a much higher level with kind of this new group of players they brought in. That's why they're right up there trying to at least get the Europa League and push for a Champions League spot. It's not that they're creating more chances, they're just taking them. Similar story with Arsenal this season. When it happens time and time again, it's not an accident, it's not unlucky. It is that you're not finishing the way you should. And it's been an issue with Chelsea at least all of this season. I would argue even before that. Still hasn't been solved. No amount of money that doesn't actually address that problem is going to help all that much. The number 9 thing is a problem because none of these players are built or at their best when they are the ones tasked with putting all these chances, when the chances are supposed to fall to them. Christian Pulisic, Mason Mount can't be your best finishers. Pulisic can if Pulisic actually gets on the field, but that's not really happening. And Mount is not supposed to be the best finisher on his team, as good of a player as he is. And so here we are again, Dortmund, somehow, some way, shout out Kareem Adeyemi, 1-0 heading into the second leg. Third game, AC Milan get a 1-0 win over Tottenham. Brahim Diaz gets the goal. Fraser Forster makes 2 really good saves. Spurs just couldn't get the ball cleared. It kind of just kept moving toward the goal, kept bouncing around, and eventually, Forster did everything he could to keep that ball out, but eventually, credit to Diaz for his persistence. He gets the goal. Charlie de Ketelaere comes in almost immediately, has a really good chance to make it 2-0, but he can't capitalize. And if you're Antonio Conte, you got to be thrilled with this result. Your midfield is just not available to you through Bentancur's injury, Højbjerg's suspension. You stayed within a goal. They didn't create all that much. The problem, for better or worse, probably better, your weak spot, I would argue, was your attack. You need more from those guys, but those guys can give you more. And you're one goal. You're going to, get Højbjerg back. You're going to have a little bit more time to sort of figure out how you want to reorganize this midfield without Bentancur again. I very much see this as an opportunity missed for AC Milan to really put some pressure on Spurs. Just generally, you come away 1-0 in a world without away goals, headed back home. Generally, you feel good about that, right? Now, of course, you would rather have it be a draw, so that all you need to do is any kind of win. But 1 goal at the end of the day, you'll take it. You should be expecting to win your home leg. If you don't win your home leg, that's where you're going to come up short, not because you lost on the road. And they didn't give up all that much. Now, like I said, this could have been 2-0 pretty easily. But it was not the onslaught of chances, for example, Chelsea had. They did a good job just kind of staying in the game, keeping things under control, making sure it didn't get away from them, making sure they didn't get overran. That emergency midfield deserves a lot of credit. Good performance. It's as good as you could have asked for, in my opinion, if you're Antonio Conte, considering the circumstances. Oh, by the way, your goalkeeper and captain wasn't there either. And again, it's not like some of these guys are coming back for the second leg. I get that. But you're going to get Højbjerg back. Again, you're going to have more time to adjust and kind of regroup with the team you have moving forward. And so I very much view this as a win for Tottenham. Doesn't mean they're going through. But particularly with AC Milan's struggles recently, yeah, you could have jumped on them and tried to put yourself in a really good position by winning on the road. But that's just not where the Spurs team is at this moment. Having just lost Bentancur, having Højbjerg suspended, you've got a team that has been really struggling coming to your building. You win by a goal, you go to extra time, you win by 2, you're through. I don't know how Antonio Conte could ask for anything more than that. And then finally, Benfica take care of business against Club Brugge. Club Brugge do put the ball in the back of the net, tight offside, rules it out. João Mario scores from the penalty spot again. Seems like every other Champions League game, that's exactly what he does. David Neres comes on, gets the second. Could have been even more than 2. I would argue 2 is a pretty fair scoreline. Benfica or Club Brugge just didn't create anything. It's not like Benfica were world beaters going forward. They looked like they could have scored 5, but they created enough chances. They took a couple of them, capitalized from the penalty spot. And I just want to give Benfica credit for showing up and doing exactly what they were supposed to. There are 3 teams who have yet to lose in the Champions League this season. One is Manchester City. One is Bayern Munich. The other is Benfica. I understand it's Club Brugge, and Club Brugge, by the way, most bizarre set of results you might find in Europe this season. With what they've done in the Champions League and what is happening domestically. Just go look at their game-by-game results and who they've played. It's fascinating. But this was clearly the worst team left. With all due respect to Club Brugge. You got a really good opportunity to get to the quarterfinals here. Club Brugge earned their spot. But that was also because, Atletico Madrid just fell apart. I have been consistent in my belief. This Benfica team is a top 15 team in the world. This Benfica team can play with anybody. This Benfica team can make the semifinals. You now have this golden opportunity to get into the quarters without much stress. Because at some point, right, you're going to need something to go your way. The more times you put yourself in difficult situations, of course, Benfica had nothing to do with the draw. But see PSG, right? The difference between winning that group and coming in second in that group is Club Brugge against Bayern Munich. Make this as easy as possible so that you can hopefully limit the amount of times that you need things to kind of go your way. And that's exactly what Benfica did. They put 2 goals up. You take care of business in the second leg, move on without any sweat, wait to see who you get, and then you kind of start this thing over because now your margin for error is much thinner. But save, right? I would have just been really, really sad. And again, maybe come Club Brugge, Mount of Furious comeback. I would have just been really sad to see this Benfica team waste this opportunity in this tie. It's the stars are kind of all aligning for him here. They got that tiebreaker 6 or 7 or whatever it was to win the group. That then got them a very advantageous draw in the round of 16. They have now taken advantage of that and put themselves in a really good position. And now they're, everything except for their second foot into the door of the quarterfinals. And you're looking at they just went toe-to-toe with PSG twice. If I'm Benfica, am I scared of Spurs or AC Milan? Am I scared of Chelsea? Now, there are certainly some other teams I don't want to play. So again, you need they're either going to have to pull a major upset or they're going to need some help to get to the semis. But there is absolutely a world where I feel very good about Benfica's chances of getting to the semifinals the way this thing has come out. So they do exactly what is expected of them, as they have continued to do all season, regardless of who's come and gone on the team. I just give them an immense amount of credit. And they're doing it in the league as well. Just game after game after game. Doesn't matter who the competition is. They are showing you. They show up every time they take the field. And they are capable of playing with anybody. That combination, there just aren't many teams in the world that have it. And Benfica is one of them. Do not sleep on these guys. They are sensational. All right, that is all for the Champions League. I'm going to take one more break, and then when I come back, ending with the weekend look ahead as always. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is time for the weekend look ahead, starting as always in England. Arsenal at Aston Villa kicks things off on Saturday. Has to be 3 points for Arsenal. This is a good kind of palate cleanser just to get yourself back on track. This run of poor performances and bad results has to end. They cannot drop any more points here. It's that simple. Second game, Leeds at Everton. Leeds not having too much success in their managerial search. Everton trying to pull themselves out of the relegation zone. I highlighted this because of the relegation implications, obviously. Two teams in kind of different spots, but similar ones. Everton are just ahead of Leeds in the whole getting the new manager in, trying to save the season thing. And then also on Saturday, Manchester City at Nottingham Forest. This is an interesting kind of follow-up for City. They've got this stretch of road games because of the way the schedule broke with all these different competitions, right? They're playing the first leg of the Champions League, round of 16 on the road. But I believe their next game after this is Bournemouth. So you have these two, Nottingham Forest and then Bournemouth, in terms of Premier League games, I should say. Games you should win. But also kind of trickier games and games on the road. So just like Arsenal need to make sure they don't drop any more points, this turns again if Manchester City go and lose to Nottingham Forest. And then perhaps the game of the weekend, also on Saturday, Liverpool at Newcastle. If Liverpool are going to mount a Champions League push here, I think 3 points here is a requirement. Just because they're running out of time, and this is your opportunity to go make sure you actually gain 3 points on Newcastle. A Newcastle team that has been dropping points kind of left and right, just not losing in the Premier League. I had kind of given up on Liverpool's Champions League hopes, but if they win this game, I might have to reconsider. In Spain, Real Madrid at Osasuna on Saturday, Atletico Madrid at Athletic Bilbao on Sunday, Cadiz at Barcelona on Sunday. Not too many high-profile matchups. Barcelona just doing their thing. Congratulations, Real Madrid, for winning the Club World Cup again. In Italy, I'm just kind of going through all the teams in this top 4 race. Napoli at Sassuolo kicks things off on Friday. AC Milan at Monza on Saturday. Udinese at Inter Milan on Saturday. Lecce at Atalanta on Sunday. Hellas Verona at Roma on Sunday. Those are kind of your primary Champions League hopefuls at this point. Germany, Bayern Munich at Borussia Mönchengladbach on Saturday. Another team and another place where Bayern have historically struggled over the past couple of seasons. Really, really interested in that one. Jan Sommer goes back to his former club. And everybody is finding ways to keep winning. Now, Bayern have also started to pick things up. But if they lose this one, it gets real interesting again. It's already a really good title race, but there are only so many games you're kind of viewing as legitimate opportunities for Bayern to drop points. And this is one of them. Then you've got Leipzig at Wolfsburg on Saturday, your best matchup from a table perspective. Schalke at Union Berlin on Saturday. That has to be 3 points for Union Berlin. And Hertha Berlin at Borussia Dortmund on Sunday, as Dortmund can look to continue their really good run of form. And then in France, Lille at PSG on Sunday. Marseille at Toulouse on Sunday as well. Every time it looks like PSG is going to run away with this league, they do things like lose back-to-back-to-back games. Now, not all of those were in the league. Of course, I'm including the Bayern loss in the Champions League. But they're given just enough leash for Marseille to hold on to that maybe, just maybe, something happens. If there's some kind of injury crisis, or, if Marseille can beat them again when they actually play in the league coming up pretty soon, they're within striking distance, holding on to hope. So we shall see how things play out this weekend in Ligue 1. That is all for the Touchline Talk Show today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button as